And here are the standings after 7 rounds. What an amazing round. Beautiful win by Aronian over my buddy Hikaru Nakamura. Just doesn't seem like the normal Hikaru. He just seemed back on his heels, which is really surprising because he played such a beautiful game against Wesley So in the previous round. Oh well, tomorrow Nakamura plays Carlsen. Hopefully Naka will have his first win against Magnus. Second place, Maxime Vichet-Lagraf, Magnus Carlsen, and Anish Giri, and Grischuk with his beautiful win over Carlsen today at 4 points. Veselin Topalov and Hikaru at 3.5. Fabiano Caruana at 2, as well as Avicii Anand at 2.5. And Wesley So in last place with 2. I'll tell you, that was a heartbreaker today for Hikaru, and I think it was a heartbreaker for Magnus as well. What a great game by Grischuk. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the first time Grischuk has beaten Magnus. Anyway, folks, that's the standings after 7 rounds. Hi, folks. Sean Cordisco back again. Round 7 of the 3rd annual Sinquefield Cup, the second leg in a 3-leg series of tournaments called the Grand Chess Tour in St. Louis, Missouri. Boy, I wish I lived closer to St. Louis. That place is absolutely stunning for chess people. Anyway, this is a hell of a game. Hell of a game. White, Magnus Carlsen, current world champion, and his black, Alexander Grischuk from Russia. Magnus is from Norway. I think Alexander Grischuk, you don't see him around the big tournaments a lot. I understand he's a world-class poker player, but I like Alex a lot. He's a really interesting guy. Funny, too. Anyway, let's get to it. I'm going to start off on move 15 because, frankly, it's a pretty long game. It's a Sicilian Najdorf. Rook A to C1 for Carlsen. A5 for Grischuk. Now this is strange. This is a strange move, Magnus. Oh, I do want to mention at the end of the video, there's a short interview with both Carlsen and Grischuk. So stay tuned for that. What to do? What to do? Queen of D1 looks pretty good. Leave a space for the knight. Bishop D3. Magnus decides knight to A1. Very, very strange move. He's going to reroute the knight, obviously, to here. I don't know where the knight's going to go from there, but at least it's better than A1. Talk about knight on the rim is grim. A knight in the corner is just as bad. G6. B4. Magnus wants to open it up. Grischuk decides to go knight to G7. That was for his G4 to plant the knight on F5. Computer's got a small advantage for white. B takes. B takes. Bishop D3. Okay. What to do here? Well, Magnus has got a backward pawn here. Black's got a backward pawn here. They both have isolated pawns. That's pretty even, and the computer bears that out. Tiny, minute advantage for black, if anything. Knight to C5. That's a good spot for that knight. Bishop C2. Doesn't want to trade his bishop for that knight yet. That's just one of the weird things in chess is the bishop's a hair more than a knight, but if you're going to trade your bishop for your opponent's knight, make sure you have a damn good reason. A4. That pawn's getting down there. Rook B1. Finally, E4. Finally, Magnus decides to trade his bishop for that knight. That is the first move in the computer. Queen to E2 is a close second. So pawn, rook takes. So now it's knight and bishop against knight and bishop, but the bishops are opposite color. So that can lead for a really fascinating endgame. This is a strange position. And look how far ahead black's E-pawn is, his A-pawn. Eventually, of course, he's probably going to go F5. But that backward D6 pawn, we'll see how that works out for black. Bishop takes. Rook takes. Bishop C6. All right, that's a good spot for that bishop. Nothing can chase it off except for the knight. So he's pretty much planted there. Now the knight can move out of A1 now, finally, for white. Knight to F5. Queen to E2, going after the, I'll call it an isolated pawn for right now because no pawns can get to it. Rook to C3. and Grischuk gets rid of the pawn. He knows he can't save it, so what's the point? Rook a3 picks up a tempo that way, pretty much delaying the movement of the a pawn. Once that thing gets rolling down there, it's going to be tough for him to stop it. Queen e2, guarding the pawn. Bishop f6. Finally, the knight gets out. Queen e7. He offers a trade of queens. Okay, score is pretty even. Rook f to e1. Queen takes. Queen to c2. Magnus decides to trade queens. Now, interesting enough, the computer bears this out. This is how good these guys are. Of course, you wouldn't take with the bishop anyway, because the bishop will come off this really strong diagonal. But he does take with the knight. Knight d2. He knows he can't save the pawn, so he just gets rid of it. Okay. We're pretty much dead even here. 4 pawns on each side. The pawns are actually symmetrical. The only imbalance, if you can call it that, it's not really one, is the opposite color bishops. But I do have to say, these are the kind of end games that Carlsen is famous for. Taking a small advantage or no advantage and just grinding the other person down. So let's see how he does. I know he probably wouldn't be real thrilled with his play up until now, but he seems to hold it together. This is where there's a lot of maneuvering going around here. So Carlsen goes right after the isolated pawn right away. And of course Grischuk has to defend it. He loses that pawn, he's in a lot of trouble. And this is a move that, oddly enough, I was really surprised at. Rook up to d1 I think is good. g3. But this is also a move that was criticized by the commentators a little bit. And it's also the #1 move in the computer, even though they're all exactly close in scores. It's one of the top 3. And that is g4. Now, to tell you the truth, I guess I'm not good enough to know why Magnus did that. He's trying to control some squares, try to cut back the scope of the bishop, maybe later come up here, then up here. I really don't know. He's going to go here, and then the pawn. I don't know. It seems somewhat okay and logical. Or he just didn't want the knight to jump to the f5 square. Bishop. He's going to reroute the bishop around rook and bishop c5. Now, I do have to say, I was pretty proud of Grischuk. He's notorious time trouble junkie. Time trouble addict. It's terrible for him. And the last 2 games he's played, I believe, are both victories. He's not gotten into time trouble. I mean, not for him. He'll have maybe 15 moves with 18 minutes left. For him, that's nothing compared to what he usually does. He gets in horrible time trouble and makes terrible mistakes. Hopefully he's learning from that. He's a world-class player. Magnus goes rook to d2, rook takes, knight takes, pawn takes, rook to c8. Okay, Magnus is going to lose that pawn. There's not much he could have done about it. So you dust yourself off, and now you bear under the pressure. Knight to e4. Okay, rook takes. Now black's a pawn up. This is going to be a tough ending. How are you going to get that pawn all the way down, especially with rooks on the board? Let's see if Magnus can pull this off. Rook to d1, h6, probably cutting back the scope of the knight. h4, king to f8. Now these are endgames that are just mind-numbing, and they're horrible to play. It just takes so much out of you. It's one of those oxymorons in chess that the least amount of pieces there are on the board, the more accurate you have to be. So now, of course, the kings come up because we all know the kings are worth the full piece. Actually, they're worth more than a bishop or a knight in an endgame. King to e7, rook to c1, stopping the bishop from moving, of course, the rook's in pre. And, of course, black can't check white because white's king is in a dark square. Rook to c8, this comes back. King f3, king e6, here come the kings. Magnus just decided, okay, we're just going to stay right there. Rook c7. I think at this point, Magnus is hoping the best he can do is a draw. h5. Like that move a lot. Now, if pawn takes, that isolates this pawn here. So we could pawn takes. Somehow, some way, Magnus has got to get his rook into the position. Bishop b6. He doesn't want to trade. Bishop d4. Now, there's no really good checks for that discovery. So Magnus just saves it. King g3. d5. Kicking the knight. Knight checks. King comes up. Right now, it's about a 1.5 advantage for black, but I think Carlsen's endgame skills are some of the top in the world. I think some of the top endgame players in the world are Carlsen, Nakamura, Kramnik. Kramnik is a notorious guy for taking a little tiny advantage or being in a position where you're down and pulling out a draw. That's what's good about these guys. If you be good enough to get a position like this against Carlsen, but to finish these guys off, their level of resistance is so high. Now we're on move 48. Black just completed his 48th move. Give you an idea of the time control. There is no delay or increment in the first 40. It's 40 moves in 2 hours like it used to be for years. An additional hour at move 40, and you pick up a 30-second increment each time. So these guys were getting pretty low here as the game went on, but they were picking up 30-second increment. King to g2, he brings the king back. Now I like king to f3, knight to f3. Just get that knight up there in his face, but he decides to come back. Maybe he wants to move the rook, and he wants to keep that king close. Maybe he wants to come up behind like this. There's a lot of things he can do. If he had gone knight to f3 after bishop f6, I think rook to a2 would be a good continuation here. I mean, he's just struggling to draw here. Bishop b5, knight f3. Bishop moves off. Doesn't want to trade yet. Rook a2. Get that rook out in the open. Rook's got to be out in the open. Big open ground to play in. Rook d7. Now he's going to start pushing that pawn. Knight e1. But first he's going to go rook c7. He wants to cut off a lot of the squares for white, for that rook to get in. King comes up. Oh, it's about time. Nothing against Magnus, but that king should have been up a long time ago. Bishop g5. Rook a5. And king e5. Okay. I think all of us would have probably checked him immediately, but these guys are better than that. He's going to bring the king around. Maybe use the knight as a blockade. Maybe use the king. Put the king on a light square, maybe. We'll see how this works out. King to e4. Here comes the king. Rook checks. d4. Okay, the pawns come up one more. Now he's on the 5th rank. And we all know pawns get more and more dangerous. It's funny, if you're playing on the receiving end and your opponent's pushing the pawn down the board, the pawn starts looking a lot bigger than it really is. It's funny. f3 check to drive the king off. King comes up to d5. Rook checks. King c4. He's trying to bring the king around on the other side. Knight to d3. Okay. I'm going to use the knight as a blockade. Notice they're all the pieces except for the rook are on light squares. And I think that's on purpose because Magnus has a dark squared, or Grischuk has a dark squared bishop. Rook to e7. Now he decides it's time to trade. He's going to trade on my terms. f4. Bishop f6. He decides to trade. Okay. Still a 1.5 advantage for black. Now, I think black's come a long ways. He's got the king all the way down the board. He's got the rooks off. And his pawn is on the 5th rank. Let's see if Grischuk can finish him off. Knight. And this is where I think Magnus start to fall apart. What's a better move than maybe knight f2, which is a really bad move. King D2, just stay right there. I don't know what else he can do, but he plays knight F2, and that's the beginning of the end for Magnus. Bishop E7, knight comes up. King C3 gets rid of the pawn, because now he can't take that pawn on H6. So queen, pawn comes up, pawn takes, knight takes. His only hope now is to pick up this pawn and sacrifice the knight for that pawn. But it's too late. Knight to C2, and the game is just over. That was a hell of a win by Grischuk, I gotta say. Magnus, he seemed to be beside himself in the short interview you'll see at the end of this video. But it happens sometimes. It happens when you're as good as Magnus and you play as well as Magnus, and you have such a good history of pulling out draws from losing games and wins from drawn games, that you expect it all the time. And it's really not fair to do that. But these guys hold themselves to a very high standard. So congratulations to Alexander Grischuk. My understanding is this is the first time he's ever beaten Carlsen. So anyway, there you have it, folks. One of the games, I should say the top game from round 7 in the 3rd annual Sinquefield Cup. I hope you enjoyed it. I want you all to remember, if you think chess is just a game, you're not playing it right. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
One player, Magnus Carlsen, after a tough loss. Magnus, what happened today? It looked like you were in somewhat control of the position, and then at some point you just lost all control.
It was an absolutely dreadful game. I mean, yeah, I didn't. I didn't really like my position too much after the opening, but I think it's, you know, playable for both sides. And then I just I think we both didn't play perfectly, but then he well, sacrificed the pawn and got his rook to a3, which I hadn't really seen. And then I needed to just keep the a-pawn and make a draw. But instead I decided to go with this knight d2, knight c4. I just hadn't simply seen that you could protect the pawn, and then I didn't really see how to equalize. I proceeded to make few more bad moves before the time control, and after the time control I felt that my position was probably lost. But then, yeah, he played quite well, I think, after the time control. But at some point he allowed me to get back into the game, and I think I should have made a draw. But in the end I got low on time and I blundered.
Were you just intent on winning the game? Were you very optimistic in the moment when you realized that you were up a pawn? Is that what maybe caused you to play a bit more aggressively and imprecisely in this moment? Or because you could have obviously made a draw anytime you wanted to?
Well, I just already when I played knight c4 and he played rook d8, I was sort of resigned to a draw at that point, and then I realized I was worse. Then it wasn't so easy. Then I played badly after that, but I didn't see how to force a draw. And practically it could be a bit unpleasant since my bishop is out of play and so on. But, of the way I lost it, it's really shameful.
I know it's a frustrating loss for you. How do you clear your mind? I mean, you just got out the game. Clear your mind to play the next 2 rounds.
It's just sort of loss I've had too often. I mean, it's just incredibly frustrating to play. I mean, I feel that I played badly in the middle game. I don't make a draw when I need to make a draw, and then I played badly in the end game as well. Of course, he deserves credit for pushing, but it's frustrating. And I mean, to lose so many games with the white pieces is just ridiculous.
All right, well, we know this is a difficult time for you. We'll give you a chance to clear your mind, and best of luck in your last 2 games.
Thank you.
World champion Magnus Carlsen after a very difficult. The man of the hour, Alexander Grischuk, after a thrilling game. Alex, that was crazy chess. You kept us entertained, absolutely. Did you feel like he overpressed at some point? Because it looked like you may have been a little worse, but then you found a nice idea to make sure the position was equal, and then all of a sudden, you were better. What were you thinking as this all was going back and forth?
Yeah, at some point I think I played sort of a weak move g6. I missed b4, which is I think is an outstanding move, because I was sure he was just going to shuffle his knight. Yeah, you know, knight c2, then maybe knight a3. So I missed b4, and then I had to start fighting for survival, which I think I managed to. I mean, I sacrificed this pawn, but with rook a3, I block this a pawn because it can become a monster once it moves to a4. And okay, I thought I'm comfortably making a draw, but I did not even hope much for the win, of course. I thought, I realized that he can overpress and then I can become better, but I did not really expect him to. But he did, and then yes, after even after time control, I think it's slightly closer to a draw than to a win. But then
you won a pawn in the position.
No, I mean even after
even
I
after
won the pawn, I thought it's slightly closer to a draw. But then, yeah, he made probably some not very good moves, and it became closer to a win. But then I started to play badly, and it again became closer to a draw. And at the end, I got lucky because I missed this rook e5, this defense, because I thought he cannot play like this because I just win a piece. So I missed, but luckily after rook e6 I still have some chances. I'm not sure if it's winning or not.
The engines are giving here, did you consider this idea, f4, bishop f6, rook e6 as played in the game, that apparently king d2 might be a draw?
No, I mean, it would not surprise me at all if it's a draw. I mean, it's just, I'm even lucky that it's not a complete draw. It could be just a complete draw, just blockade, you know, and the fortress complete. But as it turned out, he had to make some precise moves, and he was very low on time. And here it's a bit study-like position, so you have to think. You cannot just play by hand. So.
It's incredible, the time pressure situation. I know you're a great blitz player. He, of course, is also a fantastic blitz player, being world blitz champion, as a matter of fact. What's going through your mind when both players are in that kind of tense situation? Is there anything you do to clear your head so you can play good moves?
No, not really. I mean, I think you just, you don't have too much time for some outside thoughts, you know. No, but that's actually why, for example, I always get into time troubles, because during the game I always have these stretches when it's my move, but I'm not really thinking about which move to make. I'm just, you know, floating, you know.
Really?
Of course, yes, of course.
Well, it's such an incredible player to be floating in the middle of the game, and yet you did play well enough to now put yourself in not such a bad situation in the competition. How are you feeling about your chances going into the rest of the tournament?
No, but as I said, what's important for me is that I managed to play 3 chess games in a row with Aronian, Caruana, and Carlsen. And I'm so far satisfied with this. And if you play good, then results are likely to come. But when you play awful, I mean, thinking about, you know, results, tournament situation never brings any good. So, yeah.
So that's a good line for life. Thinking about the tournament situation never brings any good, and it's serving Alexander Grischuk well. Congratulations on your win against the world champion, and best of luck in your last 2 games.
Thank you.
The Russian Alexander Grischuk just creating chaos in the tournament, well, at least for one guy who's really happy, and his good buddy Levon Aronian, who is now a full point ahead of the pack.